welcome everybody to the Board of Selectmen May 21st, 2020 meeting. Again, we are conducting this meeting virtually under the new open meeting laws. Just as a reminder, the rules of conduct. Everybody will please be on mute unless you've been called on to talk. I will introduce the 3 selectmen and town employees that will be making presentations. All votes will be taken by roll call. This evening, we will also have an executive session following this meeting. So we have a very full agenda today, and I am really going to try to keep us on track. There are a lot of things that we need to work through. So I ask all of you to please be cognizant of time as you make your comments. So before we open up, the first thing I'm going to do is take roll call for the Board of Selectmen. So Robyn Hunter, present.
Bob Springett, present.
John Jeffries, present.
Also with us this evening is Chris Dwelley, the Town Administrator, and Kate O'Brien, the Town Assistant Administrator. We also have Gino Carlucci, the Town Planner, with us this evening, and Janet Claypool from the COA. So welcome everyone. The first thing I'm going to do is open this up for citizens' comments. Kate, did you get any questions this evening?
Did not.
Okay. If anybody who is participating in this call has a comment, if you want to raise your hands on the Zoom feature and we will call on you. So I don't see any comments, so I'm going to start with the first item of business, which is item 1.1, and it is, unfortunately, it's become a regular segment for our meetings, and this is the COVID-19 update. And I would also like to let everybody know that we do have the Board of Health with us this evening. The Chair, Jerry Clark, Dr. Kay Peterson, and Dr. Stephen Crisco. And again, I think it goes without saying, thank you for everything you have been doing with the task force, keeping Dover as safe a place as it can be. So the first item on the agenda under the COVID-19 update is, yes, we should have had town meeting, and we moved town meeting to later in May, and now we're going to have a discussion about town meeting, what it may look like, where it may be, and what the options are with respect to having a town meeting or not having a town meeting. So Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you. Or should I turn it over to the town moderator?
I'm happy to lead in and then turn it over to the moderator, Jim Repetti. Thank you, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, our rescheduled town meeting for June 1st is quickly approaching, and the purpose of this evening's agenda item is to have a conversation with the Board of Selectmen, the moderator, the Board of Health, and the Warrant Committee Chair, and others on how best to move forward as a community. Many of the other cities or many of the other municipalities in the Commonwealth who have an open or representative town meeting are having the same conversations at this point about what to do in terms of having a town meeting before the end of June. And the real reason is for these communities to be able to pass a budget before the end of the fiscal year so that they can continue operations as smoothly as possible. So this evening's conversation and agenda item is a conversation, and hopefully it will provide some direction on whether or not we think we are able to have a town meeting by June 30th. And I'll kick it over to Jim now, and perhaps Jim can also touch upon the various options that are presently out there that have been discussed amongst the moderators as well as the state legislature.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Is Denise Garlick here tonight?
She is, and she is, I forgot to mention that she is participating. She can only be with us until 7:30, and she's participating via video, via voice only, but she is on the call.
Oh, okay. I was wondering, Denise, if the legislature acted today with
Hi,
respect.
everyone.
Hi, Denise.
The legislature did not act today. I'm sorry, Jim.
Okay. Well, thank you. And Denise also, thank you for all your work. Okay, well, let's assume that the state legislature does adopt a reduction in the quorum requirement, and that would reduce our quorum requirement from 175 to 18. And the problem that we have been discussing is a way to ensure that people who attend the meeting will not be in harm's way. And with that in mind, we've discussed the possibility of having the town meeting during the day, at some point midday, before mosquitoes come out, before we have to worry about other health hazards, having it in the football stadium or someplace else that's outside so that we can have people spaced and adequately safe distance. And trying to deal only with the budget items, the items that are necessary to keep the town running. Having said that, we obviously have a lot of difficult issues that we have to grapple with if we're going to try to implement that. Even if the state legislature does reduce the quorum requirement to 10% of the existing requirement, we have no way of controlling the number of people who will attend. And even though we would only need 18, we might have 180. And one of the questions, Nina, that I might be putting to you a little bit later is whether we would have some recourse at that point to suspend the meeting if we're concerned that more people have shown up than we're prepared to deal with in a safe manner. The other issue that we have been discussing is which of the budget items should be approved and to what extent can they vary from budget items that were approved last year. If we have a 10% quorum requirement, we're going to be having decisions made by a very small group, assuming that we don't have a significant attendance. And to what extent do we feel comfortable implementing changes with respect to prior year's budgets that might be included, probably correctly, but nevertheless are variances or differences from what we had in prior budgets. I'm assuming that the one reason that the state legislature wants to keep this option open is to ensure that people have a voice. And if we're down to 18 attendees, query what kind of voice most town citizens are going to have. With respect to the safety, Robyn and I and Chris have been discussing, we would like to retain a consultant to help us if we decide that we will proceed with town meeting, to help us structure it in a way that the entrance to the town meeting, which again, hopefully will be held outside if we have it, and egress from the town meeting will be in a safe manner with safe distancing. Seating will have to be structured in such a way that we are maintaining a safe distance while people are in attendance. Jerry Clark has suggested that 15 feet might be a safer distance because the 6 feet item that we often hear is in fact based on old data, old studies, and more recent studies suggest that a greater distance might be more appropriate. We would also have to have a system in place to sanitize the microphone after every speaker and query who's going to be doing that. We'll have to have a system in place to ensure that our checkers, when they're checking people in, are going to not be exposing themselves to harm's way. And in my own mind, the thing that I'm wrestling with, and I'm frankly having a very difficult time with, is justifying the risk that we would be exposing our citizens to, and trying to balance that against any benefits that the town might experience. And in my calculus, I weight very heavily the well-being of our citizens, and I'm weighting very lightly convenience in running the town, except to the extent the administration of the town is going to impact the health and welfare of our citizens. In that situation, then the calculus would involve balancing potential harm to our citizens if we aren't able to have a budget in place that will continue to provide the services that help our citizens, particularly our senior citizens, lead full lives. That has to be factored against the harm that we would be exposing them to if we had a town meeting. So that's where I stand now. I have not made a decision. Another question I would have for Nina is, I want to confirm that it is my decision after I consult with the other boards. Somebody told me this morning that in fact it might be somebody else's decision. I'm happy to pass the buck. But my reading of the statute suggests that unfortunately it is my decision. But I would like some guidance on that.
All right, so I'll just jump in on that one, Jim. That's an easy one under section 10A. It is in the moderator's discretion to push things out another 30 days, but you do that in consultation with the Board of Selectmen. And if the town, I can't remember if right after all of this happened, we put into place a town meeting emergency protocol, but anything else, any of the other boards that are listed in that protocol for you to confer with. But as far as the general laws are concerned, you need to do this in consultation with the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. Well, we did draft a sort of a protocol, and pursuant to the protocol, I will consult with the Board of Health, the Selectmen, the police chief, and also the head of Department of Public Works, and the fire chief, and I intend to do that. I was hoping that you would tell me that I could just toss it to somebody else. But okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So that's where I stand right now. And what I was hoping to acquire tonight were some more data points. You know, exactly how difficult would it be for the town to conduct its business by going to the Department of Revenue on a monthly basis? To what extent would services that affect the health and welfare and also the education of our students, to what effect would those services be negatively impacted if we were to go to a monthly budget approval process with the Department of Revenue? And also, I'd like to hear from the Board of Health with respect to whether we can eliminate the risk in some manner of conducting the town meeting. And if not, to what extent can we reduce the risk? And I know that this is asking probably too much, but if that risk were quantifiable, that would be very helpful, but I understand that that's probably unlikely. So let me turn it back to you, Chris, or to Robyn, whichever one of you wishes to take the floor. Thank you.
So, Jim, thank you. You know, we appreciate your position, and this certainly is a tough situation that we're in. You know, we do have the option, as you mentioned, of submitting a monthly budget to the DOR. The reporting requirements specifically are unknown at this point, but in my opinion, the best thing for us as a town would be to find a way to hold a meeting to pass the budget. Not being able to hold the meeting to pass the budget really we can run the town, but we will be running the town with one hand behind our back. We will not, the rules, and Chris can talk to this a little more. We will be able to get funding for services that are in existence right now. We would not be able to procure any capital items. Also, any new projects that we have in the plans, we would not be able to work on. So it really would be just the bare bones of what is necessary to operate the town. And any new positions that we were thinking we wanted to hire, we could not add to that monthly budget. Also, we could definitely run the town, but it would just be bare bones. And we have to weigh the pros and cons, and there would also be an additional burden, which is really not a tremendous deal of having to do these monthly reports to the DOR. And again, we don't know what form they're going to be in. We don't know how specific they need to be in order to get the necessary funding for that particular month. So I can turn it over to Chris, because I may have incorrectly paraphrased what I had read.
No, that was a great summary, Madam Chair. Essentially, folks can think of it as you would take our existing budget for FY20, and you would just divide that out by 12 months, and that is what you would submit to the state each month. So it would be essentially what we're operating with now. So as the chair mentioned, no new increases. There is a question that's still outstanding with the waiting for clarification on, and that is on new acquisitions this year that we have future liabilities for. So one being the website, for instance. So our new website has an annual cost associated with it, and we assume that those things are able to be included in the budgets moving forward, but that is still unknown with the DOR. So there's intricacies as it relates to things that we've incurred this year that are still unclear on how we would move forward for next year. So,
Mr. Repetti, you want to make a comment, and also Mr. Clark has been waiting. But Chris, sorry I cut you off. Are you done, or?
That's okay. I was just going to say, Madam Chair, if it's all right with you, I was going to give Nina an opportunity to speak to some of the other particulars that she's seen, as well as what she and her colleagues have seen in other communities as well, just to share that with folks here tonight. So, Mr. Repetti, can I let Nina go first?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah, I'd love to hear from him, from the other gentleman. Thank you.
Sure. So the Dover is not in a unique position at all, right? All of my clients at least are open town meeting governments, and trying to figure out how to. Everyone had kicked the can down the road to late May, early June, and are now faced with actually making a decision of whether to extend it out even further past July 1. I can tell you that Chris and Robyn are not remotely alone in being leaders in the towns we represent that are in favor of passing at least the budget articles before July 1. All of my towns are trying to do that. All of the town clerks I know have been in touch with each other about figuring out ways to do that and methods of safely running the meeting and doing check-ins. So all of Jim's concerns and issues with respect to the logistics of the meeting are right on point. And our hope is that there are actually a lot of other folks that are doing this thinking as well, and coming up with systems on how to address those concerns in a safe manner that we can hopefully all share in the collective knowledge of. So I think the town clerk, ultimately, when you decide a date, either now or later, certainly should be involved in the discussion about the actual logistics of setting this up and checking people in and figuring out what to do with microphones and clickers and things like that. But those are discussions, and those are problems that that group is actively trying to solve. So I just wanted to provide some perspective that you are not all in this alone, and you have many other towns that are trying to solve these same problems and wrestle with these same questions. As of now, I think all of our towns are trying to move their meetings to the last 2 weeks of June. I don't know, everyone is kind of doing this at the same time, so I don't think anyone has their meeting set in stone yet that I know of for our clients. But I'm happy to answer any other questions about other approaches or find out some other intel for folks of how folks are going about this.
Thank you. Jim? You're on mute.
Thank you. I'm glad my wife hasn't found this mute button. Two questions, maybe three. First, if we were to resort to a month-to-month with DOR, would that have an impact on the health, education, or welfare of any town citizens? Would we be able to continue to do what we're doing now? And one of the things that I wonder about and worry about, what about cost of living increases for our employees and other, if, for example, we felt that we needed some to deal with health issues or education issues, to what extent would we be able to engage in those activities? So if I could get some idea of, you know, what exactly the baseline would be with respect to health, education, and welfare, that would be very helpful. The other is, if the state legislature does adopt this 10% of existing quorum requirement, which would allow us to reduce the required attendees from 175 to 18. What control do we have if it turns out that a group shows up that exceeds the capacity that we planned for? At that point, could I terminate the meeting or could I move it to a later date? Because obviously that would be something, it seems an unlikely scenario, but nevertheless, I think it's something that we have to be prepared to deal with. And then lastly, and this is directed to Denise and to Robyn and Chris, it seems to me that the ideal solution here, and Chris actually has discussed this quite a bit already, is to empower the Board of Selectmen and the Warrant Committee to approve the budget. We're dealing with such extraordinary circumstances with a pandemic that it really doesn't make sense to be exposing our citizens to additional risk when we have elected officials and appointed officials who are intimately knowledgeable about the operations of the town and are capable of making a very well and intelligent, informed decision. So I think ideally I would like to be able to do that because again, if the risk is not trivial, a friend said to me the other day, well, we go to Shaw's. Well, that's true, but we need food to survive. We have to go shopping because if we don't have food, we won't survive. We will survive without town meeting. It may not be pretty, but we could survive without town meeting. And So that's part of what I've been wrestling with. So 3 questions back to you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
So should we go? Well, Mr. Springett, you had something you wanted to share?
Well, I'm a little confused. I understand Jim's position, but we have we have guidelines that the state has set for reopening. And we've been practicing social distancing and wearing masks. The virus is not going away. So it's not like if we wait 30 days, the situation is going to change. It's not like if we wait 6 months, the situation is going to change. The evidence, the hard evidence suggests that if we practice safe distancing, if we're outside, if we wear masks if necessary, that goes a long way to lowering risk. There is no way we eliminate risk. And then risk is a relative concept, and different people have different ideas of what's an acceptable risk and what is too much risk. And I've been spending about the last 3 months reading and listening and observing what's happened in countries around the world and in states within the United States about relative risk and different activities that have taken place. You know, it's not like everybody's been locked down. It's not just, I mean, I was at a golf course today, the place was packed. Everybody social distance, some of the guys had masks. And so, you know, my personal view is we have got to adapt to life with the coronavirus, at least for the next 6 to 9 months. And it makes very little sense where we have good evidence we can minimize risk. And for those who are at high risk, and it's well documented who's at high risk, strongly suggest that they don't attend the meeting. But my personal view is you're talking about relative risk, you're talking about risk tolerance, you're talking about probability. And it seems to me that the guidance for those kinds of things comes from the state or the CDC. And so that's where we as a team, you know, need to do the balancing. It's not going to sit on one. I mean, I know you may have the authority, but it shouldn't sit on one person to make that decision.
Right. So I think, you know, these are all issues we're grappling with, and what we want to do. I think I believe the sense is to try and figure out a way to have town meeting to get the budget approved. And the issue is, how can we do that with the least risk possible to expose our citizens to? And that's what we're trying to discuss here. And that's why I think hiring an expert or a consultant to help us understand, because I think we've thought of a lot of the risks, but maybe not everything, but help us put in place systems to really mitigate the risk. You know, unfortunately, I think it's my personal opinion that if we don't hold the meeting now, it's just going to be a lot worse in the fall.
Yes.
And so then, you know, in my mind, we probably won't be able to have a town meeting then. So I really think we should try and find a way, think outside of the box, find a way to have town meeting, even just to pass the budget, so that we can operate the town the way it's supposed to be operated. Denise, I know you're crunched for time and you had a question, or a comment you'd like to make. You're on mute.
So I just wanted to share with people, I've had an opportunity to speak to both Chris Dwelley and Jim Repetti this week, and the concept of empowering the Board of Selectmen and the Warrant Committee to pass the budget. I've actually put in a formal memo, and I have submitted that and followed that up with a personal phone call. My understanding is that there's a very clear understanding in the House of Representatives of the urgency of this issue, but it's complicated even as this discussion that we're having on many levels. But I had hoped, and I think Jim was tossing me a softball asking me if the legislature had acted on this. Our hope had been to act on this today. So I know that you need to make your decisions in real time tonight and have your input, but I will continue to stay in touch if we have a bill that is more helpful to you.
Madam Chair, if I could jump in before Denise jumps off as well. Denise needs to be a little bit more diplomatic than I do, I think. My understanding of, I don't want this discussion to get guided or steered by the pending bill or by the quorum requirements, the reduction in the quorum requirements and that concept. My understanding is that's causing a ton of problems with the bill at the state level. And it's one of the reasons that the bill is not getting through. There's only one kind of that component of it, and the limitations on the types of articles. Those are the only components that really deal with open town government. There's a whole host of other components in the bill that representative town meeting towns and school committees and other governing boards are waiting for. So my understanding is the quorum requirement is really what's gumming up the works. And so there's a lot of folks that are looking to just get that out of the bill so they can get the rest of it going. And I think, as Jim has recognized, that quorum requirement reduction is only kind of half of a solution, right? It's not a real solution as far as solving your concerns with having to plan around ensuring safety at the meeting. It reduces the number of people you need to act and actually hold a valid meeting. But it says nothing about being able to cap a meeting, and we certainly would have legal concerns if you tried to close the doors after 45 or 50 people came in. So I don't think, this is a long way of saying, I don't think that at this time, this group should consider the pending bill as being a realistic part of the discussion for you all to be making your decision this week or next week.
Right.
So then the only decision really at hand is to try and pick a date later in June, and then to juggle all the balls in the air that we have, trying to find a way to conduct town meeting. Is that a reasonable summary, or?
I mean, you're doing exactly the right thing as far as getting all the stakeholders and folks in one virtual place to discuss when and how to hold the meeting, whether that's pre-July 1 or post-July 1. My point was only, I don't think you should at this point work that quorum reduction concept into the discussion.
Okay. So could we ask for permission to have the Board of Selectmen of the town of Dover and the Warrant Committee pass the budget? Is that an avenue we as a town could take?
The only way I think the town could do that, and Denise would know more about this than I do, is through what would be called the governor's bill, which essentially would be home rule legislation, but instead of being granted by town meeting, it essentially goes through the governor's office, and they pass a special bill just for Dover, saying Dover's Board of Selectmen can pass the budget. I do not have, the governor's office is incredibly busy.
Right.
I do not think that they would necessarily prioritize Dover's concerns before June 30th and use political capital for that. I don't know that, but that's just my 30,000 foot take on it. It's also, it would lead to a complete crush on the governor's office of about 150 other open town meeting towns who likewise would rather just have their boards of selectmen make this decision. Now, if that's come up in a separate bill, I don't know, maybe Denise knows that, but I haven't seen any legislation around that would apply to all towns. Poor Jim has been trying to ask Lily for a while.
Robyn, do I have permission to speak? Or?
You do have permission to speak.
Thank you.
You were waving your hand. I still, Mr. Clark's been very patient, so I have to grant him permission.
Okay, thank you. One other point I just wanted to make in response to Bob's points. We have a sort of contradictory state policy that's being exhibited at this point in time. We have a general prohibition against having meetings involving more than 10 people. And that prohibition has stayed in place. At the same time, we have an exemption in place for governmental bodies. And some of the conversations that I've had with our fellow citizens they very pointedly asked, well, why is it not safe for the general population to have why is it not safe for the general population to have meetings involving more than 10 people, but it is safe for a town meeting to have a meeting with more than 10 people? It's contradictory, it doesn't make sense, and it is making people very nervous. And I'm gonna have to turn off this answering machine. I'll be
Mr. Clark, is there something you want to add to this conversation? You're on mute. Jerry, we can't hear you. So I think you're having technical difficulties. So.
No.
Okay, there we go.
I have two questions, really. Just so you know, the Board of Health did meet with Jim this morning, and we certainly had a lengthy discussion. I thought it was fruitful. There were two things that came out of it that I think we'd like some information. One is just some understanding of when will the town moderator be pushed to the point of making this decision? We have some thoughts. It sounds like to me that tonight is not the time to bring up what we were discussing, that it may be better to wait to a point a few days or down from now. The other question I have, by the way, Nina, just so you know, you were looking for it, it's Mass General Law, Chapter 39, Section 10A that introduced the Board of Health into this process. But the question came up, and it's not a health question, but I think we'd like to understand it. If the town does go with the 1/12 scenario, and I'm not suggesting it should, is the result that the town gets a lump sum of money available, and it is not necessarily to be distributed according to the fiscal 20 year proportions by line item? That is to say, would it be the case that a 1/12 of the entire town budget for fiscal 20 coming in July could in fact be determined by the town accountant or the Board of Selectmen for those monies to go differently from the allocation that was in fact the fiscal 20? I think that's for Nina or for Denise.
Well, actually, Chris shared some guidance with us from the DOR.
Well, I
And this-
have the same form, and I don't think it's crystal clear even in that. It's
Right,
actually
it
not.
isn't. I mean, that's the issue.
So everything that has come from, if I could just jump to the second question, and this dovetails with Jim's earlier question, which maybe I'll start with Jim's and then continue on. So the DOR has stated that anything, if we go with the 1/12, anything that is new cannot be included in the monthly budget plan. So there are no cost of living adjustments, nothing in newly negotiated collective bargaining agreements, no new programmatic requests, no new staff requests. That departments, that our finance team is essentially going to have to take each month of the fiscal year 20 departmental spend for salary and for their expense budget and submit that to the state to allow a base level of service to continue.
With the exception that if large assessments are due in a certain month, if I read it correctly, Chris, then the full amount of that assessment. So if your retirement assessment is due in January, you get the full amount of that assessment in January. You don't just get 1/12 of it.
That's correct.
So does that answer your question, Jerry?
The second one, I think the first one, I think the Board of Health would like some understanding as to at what point this reaches a point of decision. It doesn't sound like it's tonight.
Well, it's unclear to me. Do we need to set a date for? It's not going to be June 1st. I mean, we're not ready for a June 1st meeting. So do we need to set a date for later in June, or can we wait on that?
So my read on the legislation that allowed the moderator to postpone meeting originally said, I believe the phrase was that the moderator might postpone the meeting as early as practical. So there wasn't an explicit date that said that, 14 days before June 1st, a decision needs to be made, or 7 days before June 1st, a decision needs to be made. But I think just I'll let Nina confirm or deny that, but I think from a practicality standpoint and a communication standpoint, I think, understanding that tonight may not be the night, but I don't think you want to get too close to June 1st, just so that we're able to communicate to the community.
Correct. You can extend, the moderator can declare, another 30 days extension is needed, or any time shorter than that 30 days, and we should do that as soon as possible, but I don't think there's any definitive time frame. I don't have the legislation sitting in front of me.
I had assumed that I would have to issue a declaration next week, postponing the meeting from June 1st until Chris and I had talked about going to June 22nd. And the thought was that if we decided to have it outside, that would give us some flexibility if we had to have a rain date. If it were raining on the 22nd, for example, we would still have that week where we would be able to have the meeting and adopt the budget. So Robyn, you and I had talked about having another meeting next week.
So we can do that.
Okay. And if we could have that maybe by Wednesday, if that would be possible, so that I could have the declaration out Wednesday evening or Thursday, just in case somebody is planning on showing up on June 1st, which I don't think so, but just to be on the safe side. I think that might be a way, a sort of a critical path management way to proceed. But I'm just tossing it out there to see how other people feel about that timeline.
Well, we certainly have to let people know that the meeting isn't June 1st. So I think we should just plan on having a meeting next week, and we could do it on Wednesday evening. Chris, do we have enough time to post that meeting? Oh, I have Felicia on the phone. Right, so
Hi
why don't
there.
why don't we plan on that? You know, and the meeting will be a one agenda meeting. It would just be a meeting on town meeting discussion. You're on mute again.
Yeah, and just one other thing. If this 10% quorum doesn't pass, and we have, our quorum requirement is a large quorum requirement compared to other towns. There's a program online that allows you to calculate how much space you would need to safely distance people. And using Jerry Clark's tentative, admittedly very tentative, he and the Board of Health wanted to think about some more, but they were suggesting 15 feet. In order to have 175 people with spacing of 15 feet, we would need 40,000 square feet of space, which is approximately an acre. And I think that, I think we might be able to fit that into the stadium, but we'd have to think about the logistics of that as well. So I would, I'm hoping that this 10% quorum requirement does go through, Denise, because if nothing else, it would make that part of our job easier. And again, Denise, thank you very much. You've been just such a guardian angel for us. So thank you.
Dave Haviland, you wanted to make a comment?
Yes, if I may. Without that 10% of reduction of the quorum, I would submit that our chances of getting a quorum are approximately 0.
I would completely agree with you.
We struggle to get a quorum sometimes, and in the fear of what's going on with COVID. So without it, I think it's a moot point. We can talk about it as much as we want, but we're not going to get a quorum, and therefore we're not going to be able to hold town meeting even to pass that budget.
Right. And then we may have to ask the governor's office to allow the Board of Selectmen and the warrant committee to pass the budget. I mean, there just may not
Would
be.
you be considering reducing your quorum yourselves going forward?
Right, if they don't reduce the results, because I agree with Dave, I think it's going to be almost impossible for us to get a quorum to hold the meeting.
Nina, which town, was it Ipswich that went to court?
It was
Marblehead.
Marblehead.
I'm sorry?
Marblehead.
Okay, Marblehead went to court and they got a court order reducing their quorum requirement. Is that something that maybe we should think about?
Yep, another town went today as well. I think Walpole went today, perhaps. So that is something that is certainly an option. And, you know, we have the legal briefs from that were filed by Marblehead's counsel. All municipal counsel will tell you there's, it's a very thin brief. There's not a lot of legal precedent or rationale saying that a court even has the power to do that. But there's also no one standing on the other side of the table arguing against it. So I think that is very likely to get relief for the town, and more likely than a governor's bill to have it just be done by the selectmen themselves.
If we make a decision next Wednesday, would that give us enough time to get into court to petition to have the quorum requirement reduced?
Yes, we could go in on an emergency basis and be ready to argue. But again, it's all very straightforward and there's no one opposing it.
So why wouldn't we just make that decision right now? Because there is no, you know, if we're planning on 175 people having to attend, there's no way we can make this happen. And at least with the reduced quorum, we have a chance of having a town meeting.
I agree.
I think that's a great point. The only thing I would say is you want to reduce it. You don't want to reduce it so much that you're going to get political blowback from people who think that you're just trying to use this as a way to, you know, have a smaller group of people make all the decisions for the town, which is certainly a lot of the blowback. Jim can tell you that Marblehead has gotten I know on the moderators listserv at the very least. It was a very unpopular move. Now when push comes to shove and people are actually having to hold town meeting, I think, you know, perhaps people's approach will soften there.
Right.
But what I'm trying to say is think about what that number is that you would want to reduce to. I think that the general sentiment was 10% is probably too low and too few. In addition, even if you lower that quorum requirement, you are still going to have to plan for a town meeting that is of some larger capacity.
No, and we recognize that.
Okay.
Denise, you had a
I just wanted to weigh in with you while we have been talking. I've had the opportunity to text a House Counsel, and I think that it would be very helpful if Nina was looking at the town charter, and then we could decide if a home rule petition was in order.
Dover doesn't have a charter, Denise?
Well, that should make it easier than Nina. Okay, I'll let my House Counsel know. So
The home rule petition is in theory a good idea, but the problem with the home rule petition is that it needs a town meeting, 2/3 vote of town meeting to get a home rule petition, and where the subject is obviously how to hold a town meeting, and that is putting the cart before the horse. So I think that that's useful to think about going forward, and not a helpful solution at this point for this town meeting.
There are no helpful solutions for this. It's just, you know,
It's a whole host of unsatisfying options.
right. Dave? You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to get it to, so if we went to 25%, it would be 44 people.
I think that would be a challenge.
Pick a number, Robyn. How many?
Now, I think 10%, I truly think 10% is probably a number that might be attainable. You know, there are 9 members of the warrant committee, 3 selectmen.
Andy's not going to show up.
You know, maybe 25.
Over 30. Yeah.
I think 40 might be I just don't see us getting 40 people. Rio agrees with me too. Yeah, no crying.
Nina, what did Marblehead, did they use a percentage in their request, or did they state an absolute number?
They did 10%.
Okay, so
But
you do
their
have
quorum
some,
requirement, I think I should be saying our quorum requirement is 300. So I think it was lowered to 30 people.
but at least, I mean, 10% you could cite as precedent.
Certainly.
And how many voters does Marblehead have compared to Dover?
More.
Well, that's helpful too, right? That's helpful too. I mean, if the judge were to ask, well, 10% translates into 30 at Marblehead, the response is, well, Marblehead is a much larger town than Dover, so we're still acting consistently with how the prior court ruled on this issue. So I think,
yes, and I would make all those arguments. I think someone is still, I think I could see a judge still tripping over, okay, we were at almost 200 people and now you're talking about 18 people making this decision. maybe not. I mean, you know, Marblehead had no problem at all going forward and making their argument and getting their relief in the same day. So, so perhaps not. But worst case scenario, I go in asking for 10% and I wind up walking out with 25.
Right. Can we get the same judge?
I will certainly ask them who they use. They got. I'm trying to think where they're filing in different courthouses.
So
Yes, Bob.
so it's just funny because because one of the options is to just leave it to the Board of Selectmen and the Warrant Committee, which would be 12 people. So I'm not, you know, it's just asking for a quorum of 10 gets you to 18 people. I mean, 10%, 18 people. And it's going to be, I mean, I just think it's going to be a small number. It's going to be 25 people or something like that.
Right. You know, I think Marblehead has set the 10% precedent. The legislator has
10%.
even though it hasn't passed, it's 10%. So in my mind, why not just ask for 10%? And at least there'll be some certainty to help us plan, because at this point, we don't even know what we're planning for. You know, and I completely agree with Nina, and Jim and I had this conversation. We have to plan for more than 10%. And we were saying you really probably need to plan for 50 to 75 people. But then what happens if you get 100? And so I guess you need a plan B.
Yes.
Well, I'm happy to prepare based on what I'm hearing, Madam Chair, from you and Jim. I'm happy to prepare the paperwork for that and be ready to file that on Tuesday.
Okay, so do you need a formal vote?
I would love a formal vote. I'm trying to think in your bylaws. Yes, I think the selectmen control as opposed to the town administrator.
Okay. So then I would like to make a motion to have town council prepare, what are you preparing, Nina? An injunction?
Litigation.
To say prepare and file an action in court to reduce the necessary quorum for town meeting down to 10% of the current quorum requirement.
Just what she said.
Okay.
So moved. Right.
All in favor? Robyn Hunter, yes.
Bob Springett, yes.
John Jeffries, yes.
Okay, thank you, Nina.
Great. So I will I'll work with Chris on that paperwork, and then to the extent that the selectmen and Jim want to see that or be involved, I'll just work that through Chris.
Okay. All right. So we made one decision. So Kay, I saw you had your hand up, and thank you for your patience.
Am I unmuted now? Can
You
hear
are.
me? Okay, good. I have a logistics question, and I'd like to ask Nina if you've heard of any creative proposals for conducting town meeting in this kind of circumstance. And I was sitting here thinking about, I was talking to somebody about graduation ideas, and this idea of having a rolling parade and using automobiles to separate people. And then I started thinking about drive-in movies, and I started to have this fantasy of cars on a football field with Jim up on a big stage like a rock star all by himself. and I'm being silly a little bit, but I also think that it's worth thinking creatively, and cars are a good way to keep people in their family units and keep them separated and feeling safe. You know, the idea of having people park and have to walk to a field means there's a lot of opportunity for unanticipated events. And that's part of the risk. You know, if you knew that you could keep people 15 feet apart, and if you knew everybody would wear a mask and nobody would give you any lip about that, no pun intended, it would be one matter. But it's the risk of the unknown that really is important to keep in mind. And I think that if we could figure out a way to do it with cars, that would reduce an element of risk.
Well, that's a good suggestion. So actually, I do have a comment from a citizen who said, don't you think this would be a lot easier to hold the meeting virtually? So does somebody want to take that? Why this cannot be held as a virtual meeting?
It's not permitted by law. And so the current bill that has the reduction in the quorum requirement for open town meeting also has a proposal for representative town meeting towns to be able to hold their representative town meetings virtually. Our representative town meeting clients are very anxiously awaiting that and pushing for that option. But representative town meeting is a very different governing body than open town meeting, and it is just far easier to control people's access to technology and facility with technology ahead of the meeting in a way that would be very difficult to do for open town meeting members. So that is certainly a proposal. Everything that we're dealing with in life right now is being converted to virtual, but that is not a proposal that is being floated as a viable solution for open town meeting government at this point, as far as I know. I mean, people are certainly talking about it, but it's not part of any legislative proposal that I'm aware of, and we would need that legislative approval in order to hold it virtually. With respect to the cars, I haven't heard that for town meeting. I don't see any legal impediments to it other than the technological logistics. You could certainly, I know many of our boards and committees at this point are broadcasting of our local radio station. I don't think that would be incredibly difficult to have, like the old movie theaters have, you know, gyms in the presenting stage folks broadcast over local radio station. People listen to them in their cars, in a parking lot. That is possible. I don't think I have any legal concerns with that. You still would need to provide a way for people to get up and ask questions and things like that. But
I thought it was important to ask that question because it's the first question that comes to everybody's mind. Well, what's the big deal? Why can't we just hold this meeting virtually? So thank you, Nina. I don't think there's any more discussion to be had here. Jim, I know you're going to have a conversation about getting a consultant. So maybe at our meeting next week, we'll have a little more information about that to share.
Yeah, I'll be talking to Kevin Mann over the weekend. He's very busy, so it's going to have to wait till the weekend. He has a little bit of time to see who he would recommend, and hopefully we'll have some names next Wednesday so we can have a vote by the board to approve retaining these people to help. Kay raises a good point. You know, one of the things that we've been wrestling with too is we're going to have a very heavy police presence, not because our citizens are not law-abiding, they're very law-abiding. It's rather because we're going to have to make sure that we have very good crowd control in terms of maintaining distances and directing people which way they can leave and which way they can come. And during, when the meeting starts, we'll be seating people, I'm assuming sequentially, so that they won't be bumping into each other. And then when the meeting adjourns, we'll have to dismiss people sequentially and have them leave in a way that's maintaining the distancing. So there are a lot of moving pieces.
Right, there's a lot of logistics that you don't think about. So I think I'll go to, I'm not sure if there's any kind of a COVID update, Mr. Springett.
No, at the meeting last week, things were working out, pretty well. So from the police department, from the highway department, from EMS, it was pretty much status quo. And we were heavily into the reopening sort of planning. And I think some of the things I've seen, other documents for tonight have indicated how well prepared we are to do a phased reopening. So that's all working well. The thing I'm going to probably raise tomorrow and over the next several weeks is really thinking very carefully about how we, if we can be better prepared for a second wave of infection in the fall. And in order to do that, we really need to understand the case management side, but in particular, the availability of testing and contact tracing. I mean, we didn't get it right in this first wave as a state, and the country didn't get it right. But we really need to have that right before the fall. So that'll be the next sort of thing we tee up for the task force.
Oh, that makes sense. Jerry, you have a comment?
Very quick. I spent time this afternoon with a discussion on both space planning and the issue of air handling. And I won't go into the space planning, that's quite involved. I will say to you, it was a rude awakening as to the recommendations that were provided. They failed to even take into account schools and municipal buildings and the like. But I think there's going to have to be a considerable discussion about changes in how air handling is done in any building, school, a town hall, or the like, going forward. So I just want to prepare people for that.
Okay, thank you. Chris, do you or Kate want to touch quickly on all the work that you guys have done for the, I'm going to put it in quotes, the re-entry into the workforce, those documents were really good.
Yeah, I'll let Kate take the lead on that. She's been working with a group of folks, committee members and staff members in town to document a lot of the processes that we have in place and the things that we're looking at moving forward.
Chris. So our phase one, as what we're calling it, is pretty much a mix of it's status quo, what we're doing at the moment, but also meeting all the compliances issued by the state that are starting from May 25th. Part of that is making a compliance plan. And the other part of that is also displaying different types of posters for residents and when we do have residents come in there, and for staff. So status quo right now would just be so close to the public, by appointment only. So that would continue. Really, there's no other big changes. We're going to make a couple little things as far as providing a bigger drop box for plans. That's something we've heard some people, they didn't have enough room to drop plans off, so we're gonna do that. And one entrance, one exit. And I don't think there's anything else new in that plan. As far as looking ahead, when we do open to the public, there'll be a lot of signage as far as directing people through the flow of traffic, markings on the floor 6 feet apart in front of any counter, public-facing counter. All public-facing counters will have the shield guard. And at this time, we're thinking of keeping the first floor by appointment only during this second phase of the public opening. Just because that is just a very problematic space down there to have the public walking around as far as keeping your distance. But yeah, I don't know if anyone had any questions or.
I would say the actual in the office environment, you guys have been doing most of the things that have been recommended, including wearing masks, distancing, and we also have the reduced staff and the encouraging of people to work remotely. So all those things have been in place for a while now. And so, as you had pointed out, a lot of this is sort of additional signage and maybe a couple of things tweaking the way we've actually been working for about 4 to 6 weeks, I guess, maybe longer. Yes?
Correct. And I also have included a self-certified document for employees to fill out and sign. And before each employee starts their shift, they would have to verbally confirm that they self-certify all of these things, and it's, you know, not having a temperature at a certain point and not coming into contact with anyone who has COVID or things like that. So just be a daily reminder, but they also have to sign that form on Monday.
Chris, did you have more?
Yeah, just thanks, Kate. Just 2 quick things I just wanted to add to that. One is related to board and committee meetings moving forward. The general guidance from the state, as well as from a lot of the other communities that we've heard from, is to continue public meetings, public hearings virtually for the foreseeable future. Nobody has been able to master the logistics, very much like town meeting, about what do you do if you hold a hearing or a committee meeting and it exceeds 10 people and you're not prepared for the logistics. You just can't cancel the meeting. So there's a whole host of difficult things to be figured out. So we're going to remain, the recommendation is for all board and committee members to remain virtual. As everyone knows, we had just regulatory boards and committees having meetings and recommended all other advisory boards to postpone their work. We'll issue guidance to open up Zoom and other technology opportunities for those other boards and committees so that they can start to do their work in the next couple of weeks. So that's a big point that I wanted to convey as well. And the other point is the state issued building capacity guidelines, and they were 25% per office space. And with our guidance that we issued a few months ago about no more than 1 person per office if you're in the building, we meet that. We do have a few people who do share office space, and we are cognizant of that there are potential times where people could overlap unintentionally, even though there's a requirement of 1 person per office. So our building superintendent is looking into portable workstations that could be placed in the Great Hall, distanced apart so that people aren't sharing office space. So that was a second point. But by and large, we're in a good place. And, you know, I like to think that the governor's reopening task force looked at all the work that Dover had put into place to incorporate into their plans. So it makes our transition much more easier.
I'm sure that's what they did. So I just have one little reminder, and it's a pet peeve of mine, just to all citizens under this COVID topic. You know, the state has issued guidance to wear face masks or face coverings when you're outside. Those are public places. So the woods are a public place, the roads are a public place, the transfer station is a public place. And, you know, all citizens should abide by that regulation. It's for your protection and the protection of everyone else. So with that, an hour late, we can now move to the second item. What, you want to make me an hour and 2 minutes late, Mr. Springett?
I thought there was a comment about, do we allow like vendors and FedEx into the townhouse?
Oh, I did not see that. So Chris, there was a question about how do we handle vendors, FedEx, UPS? Are they allowed in the townhouse?
So UPS and mail are only allowed it's essentially by appointment. So they call ahead to a particular office, and then that office receives that package, and the office and the FedEx and the UPS folks practice present safety standards with wearing masks, wearing gloves, and sanitizing packages. As for vendors, it's only been on an emergency basis. So I'll just give you, for instance, there was a pipe that needed to be repaired in one of the restrooms in the townhouse, and that if we waited, it could have potentially caused a leak. So we wanted to have them come in, but everybody essentially goes to the building superintendent, and he mandates and makes sure that everybody's abiding by all of the requirements that have been put forth through the state and through the Board of Health.
Thank you. All right, so with that, I am now going to move an hour and a minute late to item 2 on the agenda, which is to vote to lay out Stagecoach Lane as a public way. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on your agenda this evening is the final step in the process to lay out the Stagecoach Lane before it moves to town meeting. This came by way of a citizen petition back in late 2019 for the town, requesting the town to essentially accept Stagecoach Lane as a public way. So we had an original hearing 2 months ago that we postponed till this evening to allow for the planning board to take a vote. So at this point, I will actually pass it over to Gino Carlucci, the town planner, to talk a little bit more about the process and the background on this project.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Yes, well, this is the subdivision approved about 2013. And back in the fall, there was an as-built plan was submitted. It was the road was inspected. It complied with the original plans that were approved by the planning board. And at that point, the planning board released the security because everything was done in accordance with the plan. So then the developers petitioned for town acceptance, and it was eligible. There are a couple of administrative issues that arose, one being maintenance of the drainage system that's been resolved. And a more recent one is that the actual land that comprises the road was not held in reserve by the developer, so it's owned by the abutters to the center line of the road, which complicates a little bit the process because now all the abutters have to grant an easement to the town. So I know Nina had addressed this as well, and she may want to speak more about what that process needs to be going forward. No?
I'm happy to. But yeah, we're going to get our real estate council in touch with the developers council. There is some confusion that we need to clarify as far as who owns the way, and it appears that the developer did not reserve the parcel to either the development company or to a homeowners association. So then if that was the case, then all the homeowners do them to the center line, and we would need easements from all of them. But that's not unsurmountable hurdle. That's something that we deal with all the time. So there's just a peculiarity where the developer has been paying apparently the assessment on the street as a separate lot for the past however long. So I would just, all the selectmen need to be concerned about at this point is that we are handling the ownership issues, and any acceptance of the way, it should be conditioned on the stormwater maintenance system issue, as well as clarifying the ownership issues. And we won't complete the acceptance process by recording the acceptance until we have satisfied ourselves that we have the proper owners of these parcels actually granting these rights.
So, Nina, I have a question for you and also for Gino. So, Gino, why did the planning board allow, or maybe actually, Gino, you can defer the answer part of this, and Nina, you can answer the second part. Why did the planning board allow the drainage system costs to be deferred from the homeowners association to the town? And is that ownership the conditional part that you just referred to, Nina?
I don't think there's a homeowners association in this development, John. So
in the Madam Chair, in the letter that we received from the planning board, it referenced the homeowners association costs to be for the cleaning of the drains to be picked up by the homeowners association costs, because the cleaning of the drain used a vacuum system that the town doesn't have.
Well, the explanation here is that the drainage units that were installed happened subsequent to the original planning board approval. They were not part of the original subdivision. They were, Mark Howe may wish to address it more, but they were mandated by DEP after the planning board approval. So the planning board was not aware of these units. In the meantime, no homeowners association was established or needed, because it was a very conventional subdivision, very standard infrastructure. There was no thought or need for anything unusual. So so then when we came down to the final inspections, it's noted that these units were there. The town engineer suggested that the town should not be responsible for maintaining those because of the cost. However, the flip side is all the houses had been sold with the expectation that there was no homeowners association, that they would not have to be part of a homeowners association. So the compromise position was that the developer would finance the maintenance for a certain number of years, which it turned out to be, it was agreed to 3 years. And so that's where we are.
Mark, you wanted to make a comment?
Hi. Yes, Gino's spot on. And that's exactly what happened. We went through the approval process, and we started, everything got approved, and we started construction, and then the DEP came knocking on the door and said, hey guys, we want you to put in these stormwater drains. It was after the fact. And so we we had to. Otherwise, they were going to pull the permits. So that was done, and as Gino had mentioned, we never established we didn't want to have a homeowners association, and so that was never established, and then the ball just kept rolling, and Gino explained it. I'll just be saying what he had already mentioned.
One other point, it was stated that the town does not have the vacuum truck equipment to clean those. That is absolutely true. However, it's not that the town never uses that equipment. They do rent the equipment for other uses at least once or twice a year. So going forward, it is possible to hope. I don't know how long it takes to do these things, but when they're renting it for other purposes, hopefully they can at the same time take care of these 2 units as well.
So my understanding is that any other roads in town that have a stormwater system have an HOA, and it's the residents of that road that pays for the maintenance. Can somebody confirm that?
Not every other subdivision in town. In fact, I believe the only 2 that I'm aware of are Dancer Farm on Hartford Street. And that was done because from the very beginning, it was intended to be a privately operated system with a homeowners association. And, that was noted up front. The other one was Dover Farms, which is a 40B and has many items of shared infrastructure that, homeowners associate. And that's not a conventional subdivision, of course. That's a 40B that did not go through planning board. I'm not aware of any other subdivision in town where the homeowners maintain the drainage system.
Mr. Springett?
Okay, so are there a few I's that need to be dotted and T's crossed before we move on this? That goes to, I thought you had a few things that you were mentioning that we should really clean up before we go forward.
So as Nina spoke about, as Nina mentioned earlier, we found out this week that the residents on the road own up to the center line, as Gino and Nina talked about earlier. So whatever action that the board decides to take, if it is to move forward with the acceptance, it should be contingent upon what Nina mentioned earlier, and that is the acceptance by those residents to allow the town an easement to that. And then the second piece is essentially around how the board would like to move forward as it relates to maintenance and responsibility for the stormwater systems. Gino mentioned a conversation that he had with the developer about sharing some upfront costs. Now, that's not necessarily a requirement for any of this, but it was a conversation that the 2 parties had as it relates to that. Gino, if I may ask, could you share for the group, are these systems unique to town? Are these systems already in place in town? Could you provide us with a little bit more background on what's in the ground?
I don't believe these units are anywhere else in town, to my knowledge, but I'm not knowledgeable about the stormwater system throughout the town, except I know that from the conversations that we've had about this, that there are not other units that require a vacuum truck to clean them out. So based on that, I would assume that there are not these units. They're not uncommon elsewhere. More and more these days, as part of upgraded stormwater cleaning management. these are the type of units that are getting installed in greater numbers as we move forward. So I would expect that these are not going to be the last ones in town.
So, thank you, Gino. Nina, can you just go back to my original question because, and to Gino, just one point of clarification. I think I live in one of the oldest original subdivision or streets in Dover, and my properties are all part of association. My street is part of association, and I know others are. So my question is back to Nina. You mentioned, I was taking notes while you were speaking, Nina, and you did mention in this the conditional upon the association. So where did the intent of there to be an association and then an association was deemed not necessary? When did that happen in the process?
If I mentioned association, I meant owners. There has never, as I understand it, there's never been an association for this development, nor does there necessarily need to be. It is not a requirement of a subdivision to have the homeowners association. So I don't think the board needs to get hung up on the fact that there's no homeowners association. What we need is a grant of easement from the homeowners, and where they are the petitioners here, I'm assuming that will be easy to negotiate with them. So I don't see any reason to belabor this issue with the board, as long as if the options for the board are hold off on a decision, deny the acceptance, and vote not to lay it out unconditionally, or lay it out on the condition that we come to a satisfactory agreement with respect to the stormwater management issue and clarify, obtain the requisite approvals from the owners. When I mentioned the stormwater management issue, my understanding is that we were negotiating an agreement with the developer on, again, sharing that upfront maintenance cost, or having him and that entity fund the upfront maintenance costs for at least the first couple of years. But we have drafted an agreement along those lines, but I have not been involved in the direct negotiation of that, so I don't know where that stands. But I don't see a reason why the board couldn't condition the acceptance of the way on negotiating the maintenance agreement and negotiating easements with the owners.
So last time the neighborhood came before us, there was also some mention of a legal suit that had been filed. Does anybody know whether or not that was going to be filed? Due to, I think it was extensive rotting that people were having in their homes as a result of water levels. So I was wondering if that issue had been resolved.
So can I speak about that?
Sure.
Thanks. That was one individual. We have not received any lawsuit. And I don't know what to tell you about them. And it has nothing to do with the subdivision or the road.
I mean, my only issue here is I don't have an issue accepting the road. I do feel uncomfortable about accepting the maintenance costs for stormwater units, for forever. I'm just not sure what the precedent is in town. So for instance, if we were to build a new subdivision and we learned up front that these stormwater units were necessary, would that be a cost that was acceptable to the town? Are we maintaining other stormwater systems in town?
Madam Chair,
Nina,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
So as you know, so the group over there are paying a little under what, couple $100,000 in taxes annually, and the stormwater cleaning, there are no mechanical components to it, and it's simply getting the vacuum truck in there and cleaning it out, and we're not talking tens of thousands of dollars. I've agreed to pay up to $2,500 a year for the next 3 years, and we're hoping that that is more than generous in taking care of those costs.
So I'm just trying to understand what the town's position would be on this. I recognize these are paying, these are taxpayers in the town, citizens in the town. So if any other subdivision were to be built and there was a requirement for a stormwater system, would that be an issue for us at all to accept the maintenance of that stormwater system?
I understand where you're coming from, and I think that this came in after the fact, and if it had been something that everybody was aware it needed to be part of the subdivision plan with the planning board, that would have definitely would have been discussed, but it was after the fact.
And it was by the state.
Yes, correct.
This is a slightly off script, but I mean, stormwater runoff is going to be a continuing issue.
Right. I know that. I recognize. So that's why I'm trying to. I just want to look at both sides of this equation and make sure that. So, what I'm trying to understand is if the stormwater regulations were in place today that are in place when this road went in, we would have accepted as part of accepting the road, we would have had these kind of costs. So I'm trying to reconcile with myself, whether this is a cost that the town should expect to incur.
Gino, can you speak to the planning board process and the general planning process on these developments and how stormwater could be a part of that moving forward, and how I believe each individual plan is on an individual case-by-case basis?
Yes. First of all, the town maintains the stormwater systems throughout the entire town in every subdivision, with the two exceptions that I mentioned earlier. This happens to be a more advanced type of unit that has just come into use in recent years. So it's kind of a philosophical question. Does the town wish to exclude maintenance of this type of unit going forward when it's traditionally every town maintains their own stormwater systems that exist currently? It's a philosophical issue that I really can't answer. However, it could be the policy. If it's the town policy, the planning board could, going forward, insist upfront on a homeowners association to maintain the stormwater system. That many other towns are doing that. That would not be unusual either. It can go either way. So I think that's what I would say.
In my street, on the properties that I own on the street, we pay for the telephone poles, the lights, the maintenance. We pay for all of that. How is that paid for at Stagecoach?
The lights?
Yeah, we quite literally pay for the
street lights, you mean?
Street lights.
There are no street lights on Stagecoach Lane. This is Jen Cashman. I'm one of the residents here of Stagecoach. We have no street lights.
And so there's no, so Jen or Mark, maybe either of you could answer this. There's no maintenance cost. There's no.
There's no.
There's
So John,
nothing else for a
there's no sidewalk. Nothing. Everything is privately held. The landscaping at the front entrance is privately held. We've got just the road and the the circle at the end with a few shrubs and bushes in the center.
So, Madam Chair, I think for the purposes of tonight and to find a solution for the process, and if I've heard everybody, what I will suggest is, as you said, and I think both as Bob said, certainly as Nina points out, we could make a motion to accept the road conditional acceptance on the road, provided that we, the Board of Selectmen, come to an agreement with Mark, and if there's, in the absence of a homeowners association, with Mark, the financial obligation for this process going forward, the water, the maintenance of the storm water system.
Well,
Is that right?
Well,
there's a compromise position that's been put on the table already, and the compromise position is that the developer will provide funding for 3 years of maintenance, and then the town will, from there on out, continue to maintain the system. So there are, I'm going to allow, there are residents that would like to make a comment, so I'm going to allow them to make a comment. So Jen Cashman, would you like to speak?
Hi, thank you, Robyn. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's well. So all of this is new to me. I didn't know that there was any issue with the storm drains and the cost assumption. And I certainly can't speak for any of my other neighbors, but I will tell you that I'm not necessarily comfortable agreeing to this, and I would urge you not to accept the road at this time until there's more clarification on what the costs will be, if in fact the neighbors are to assume it at some point through an HOA, or if the town is going to take over, as you just mentioned, Robyn.
Right, so I think the proposal that's on the table here is that the town accept the road, and along with the acceptance of the road, accept the compromise proposed by the developer, that the developer will pick up 3 years of the cost, and then the town will continue to maintain the.
I see. So there won't be any assumption of those liabilities to the homeowners?
No.
Okay.
Not with the proposal on the table.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Okay. So Bob, John, are you comfortable making?
Yeah, I think.
Are there questions you don't have answered?
No, this is sort of an odd situation how it developed over time,
Right.
and it seems like probably the best thing to do is to I guess it's accept the lane, the street, with Mark's offer on payment of the maintenance of the stormwater equipment for 3 years, and the contingent that Nina brought up about getting the easement from the town, from the owners of the houses, in order to help us move forward. And then I think going forward, we obviously have to decide what our position should be, and we have to make an exception in this case, I think.
Well, we have set a precedent. So, our position is that as a town, we will maintain these storm water units. And I think if the DEP came in and in an already developed neighborhood said, you need to put one of these units in, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the town would go and put in the stormwater unit and maintain it. Is that correct? Or Gino?
That'd be correct, with the exception, I believe, of the two two streets that Gino had mentioned earlier.
Right.
Well, it becomes the way we do business.
Right. Right. So is that your motion? Do you want to make a motion?
Not me. I have no idea what I've been talking about.
Oh,
So
you're such a
John has been writing everything down.
okay.
Before you do that, may I ask one additional question, please? This is Jen Cashman again.
You may.
We have a fire hydrant on our property that I understand to be non-working. Is that in any way tied into the storm system, or is that separate to Colonial Water Supply?
That is Dover. We don't have enough pressure for any fire hydrants. As a matter of fact, when I first moved to town 22 years ago, and I got my insurance policy, and they told me I was paying more because there were no hydrants, and I said to them, "No, there's a hydrant right across the street from me." And then I was told that there are hydrants, but there's no water that goes to the hydrants. So there just isn't enough water pressure to man.
Okay, so there won't be any maintenance costs associated with that, or flushing, or anything like that? Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, Mr. Warnick.
Oh, Carl.
That hydrant belongs to Colonial.
Okay.
There will be no main. It's on them.
Okay.
Because it's their infrastructure up on that side of town.
Thank you, Carl.
Hi, this is Robyn Ellis. I'm also a homeowner on Stagecoach. So does the hydrant work if Colonial maintains the hydrant?
No, as Robyn said, there's not enough flow, water. There's plenty of pressure, but not enough water flow.
But if
it requires about 550 gallons a minute to be certified.
Why did they put in a hydrant if it wasn't going to work?
For the
I
dog.
believe it's mandated under the planning board regs. Every 500 feet, there has to be a hydrant.
Well, there's only one on the lane, so I'm not sure that they met the 500 feet requirement.
But I don't understand the point of requiring hydrants if none of them work.
Well, they use them for flushing purposes. I mean, Gino could answer that question probably better than me, but that's, from what I understand, is the reason they require them.
Yeah, I'm really not sure, but that makes sense that if they're not available for fire protection, that they might still be useful for cleaning out the lines.
DEP requires that they don't like to see dead ends. Subdivisions are a dead end. They like loop systems. So you get less discoloration in the water.
And the hydrant helps flush that out, because Colonial Water does flush the system once or twice a year. So
yes, most municipalities do.
Admittedly, I know nothing about flushing hydrants, but I'm just curious how flushing of this hydrant might affect our storm drains. Would that fill it up and require the storm drains to be flushed or cleaned more frequently?
No.
No?
No, I wouldn't think so.
Thank you.
It's when they're cleaning the storm drains out, it's just basically sediment that they're sucking out.
I see.
Okay.
All right, John, you want to make your motion?
Yeah, Madam Chair, to get back to the motion, and I think the essence of the board's concern, if I may, was the fact that we're in some way we do not want to set a precedent that we would have to, in the next several petitions for acceptance of roads, that we would have to be looking at the continued maintenance of drainage or improvements of drainage systems. So I do understand the separation of business as usual, and that this is a new system that Mark was, so as in his words, to put in after the fact. So if Gino and the planning board is satisfied with the financial obligation that Mark has agreed to make for the first 3 years, and if the Board of Selectmen is satisfied that the $400,000 or $500,000 that we'll be taxing the citizens of Stagecoach as per year as we're going through the the maintenance of these issues. I hope the people at Stagecoach realize that that was me being facetious, that we won't raise your taxes to that extent for a while. But that it's going to be a good deal for everybody, and it's not going to be a financial obligation that the town of Dover can't support, in essence. Is that correct, Mark, essentially?
That is. Yeah.
So, with having said that, and with the hour upon us, I would move that we accept Stagecoach layout, as Nina mentioned, conditionally upon, what was the last two words, Nina? What was the conditional part? You're muted.
It's amazing how often you get annoyed with other people doing it and then you do it yourself. There are two conditions: acceptance upon satisfactory agreement being reached and executed with the developer, and confirmation of ownership and all necessary ownership documents from the owners of the way.
Madam Chair, that's a moment taking notes.
Do you want a second?
Would like a second.
Second. All in favor? Oh, somebody has to.
Jeffries.
Robyn Hunter.
Bob Springett, aye.
All right. So moving right along.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, to the third item on our agenda, and that is the Colonial water contract discussion. So Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you initially.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sure, as the board knows, the town has been in a long-term lease agreement with Colonial Water Company to allow them to utilize the town's water infrastructure to deliver water to its customers. This agreement is up for renewal. It's in the final 3 years of its 3-year term. And I think just two things come to mind. One, just by way of best practice, I think it's a good idea for the town to take a closer look at the agreement to make sure that it's still reflective of the operations as well as the needs of the community. The agreement dates back to 1994 with little change made to it since then. As well as there are some just general provisions within the contract, as well as things that the town should consider, such as ensuring that the town has adequate capital funds to maintain our system. So although we enter into a lease agreement with Colonial for them to utilize our infrastructure, the town is responsible for that infrastructure. So if it breaks, if there's a leak, the town is responsible for that. And at present, the town has not in the past or presently budgeted for any capital funds to maintain or repair that system. So that's another big piece. So leading up to the expiration of the present lease, the building superintendent, who's also our water superintendent, and I sat down with an engineering firm who specializes in water systems, CDM Smith, to talk about the water setup in town. And they have provided a scope of work that you'll find within your packet that is essentially twofold. And this is the recommendation that I ask for the board tonight, is that you allow me and Caryl to work with CDM Smith, who will work with the town to do two things. One, they'll help the town evaluate the present agreement with Colonial to make sure that it's reflective of operations and reflective of the town's best interests, as well as get a better understanding of the town-owned infrastructure, what the value of it is, and what a capital maintenance plan and cost would look like, so the town can have all that information so that we are best prepared as we enter into negotiations on contract renewal.
So I, for one, support moving forward with this. I think, we know there are issues with the contract or things with the contract that need to be addressed. The question I've asked for many years now is who's responsible for the infrastructure? How old is the infrastructure? How much would the infrastructure cost to replace? So we will be getting an answer on that. And I think it would be good to get an outside opinion on the contract itself and how it stacks up with other types of contracts between towns and private water companies, and if CDM Smith has any suggestions for items that we would like to discuss and revise with Colonial. I think one thing's certain, that the agreement, the way it sits today, needs to have some changes made to it. And this is the first step in that process, getting outside feedback on that. So I support that. Mr. Springett?
No, it's long overdue. I think we really have to have someone take a look at I think the contract goes back to the mid-90s.
Right.
So it certainly needs to be, let's say, refreshed. And obviously the incident that we had in town where someone bothered to, have a little accident and cause a little problem to the water infrastructure, and we have no idea what the heck's going on with that. So yeah, it makes sense to me.
Right. Mr. Jeffries?
Madam Chair, I agree with both your comments and Bob's comments. So in the absence of any other discussion, I would move that we allow the town administrator to enter into the conversation. Actually, I'm sorry, I apologize. Mr. Clark, do you want to make a comment before we make that motion?
6 years ago, I circulated.
Jerry, this evening, we're not going to discuss in detail the contract.
Okay, but I want to discuss the process that you're currently undertaking.
Okay.
In specifics, I have circulated even more material to all three of you and to Mr. Dwelley. I hope this time it's read. It is not a lease contract. It is a provisioning contract. As to one of the aspects of the issue of infrastructure maintenance, the contract actually calls for Colonial to fund your infrastructure through collections from the 70 residences that are served, plus the commercial buildings. So I would suggest that you question whether or not those monies have ever been received since 1994.
Right, and this is all part of the process we intend to undertake.
I also spoke to two engineering firms, both of them with experience with Dover Water Company, and both of them with experience with Dover. One of them has done the hydrology study, and they suggested a rather minimal cost to do exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm sure during the process, Mr. Dwelley can come back to us with his findings and his recommendations. But Madam Chair, if you would like a motion, I'd be happy to make that for us this evening.
I would, because I think this is the first step in the process of finally, looking and not rubber stamping the approval of the water contract.
So I would move to allow the town administrator to execute all documents related to the town water services. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, Robyn Hunter.
Aye, Bob Springett.
Aye, John Jeffries.
Thank you. The next item is the summer meeting schedule. So I think the last time we discussed this, we kicked the can down the road.
There's a lot of twists in that road.
Right. And so I think what we decided was it's probably a good idea to have at least 2 meetings set up so that business that needs to be taken care of can get taken care of. And then we would weave in some of our working meetings, so we would have 2 regular meetings over the summer to address business. And then we would have our own working meetings, which would involve, working through the goals and objectives with the staff for the following fiscal year, and any new projects that need our attention. So does that work for everyone?
Well, clearly the 2 in June make a great deal of sense, right?
Right.
And so I don't understand why. So in July, do we set July and August? We have 1 meeting each, one for business, and then we're going to augment that with planning meetings.
Right.
Okay. I'd prefer the Wednesday the 1st, unless we have to have on July.
No, so it's our summer schedule. We can do Wednesdays.
Well, it's just that, the closer you get to 4th of July weekend, I'm hoping we might be able to make it a long weekend for folks.
Okay, no, I agree. I mean, we could even move it the week after. Chris, I'm not sure. Does it make sense to have meetings more in the middle of the month? What kinds of things do you think you might need approval for?
I think, as we can move things to the middle of the month or middle of the week, but I think as Madam Chair, you mentioned earlier, maybe the best practice would be we could just lay out, at least on the calendar, biweekly meetings. And then as we look ahead, we can drop things off if we don't have any agenda items or any matters to discuss.
Okay, that works. And Bob, would you prefer we'll make them Wednesday nights for?
It doesn't matter. It's just that we wanted to make sure people had a chance to have a long weekend from all the work.
Right. So why don't we make them Wednesday nights? I don't think I'm going to New York anytime soon. So we could have them.
With everything with COVID and the potential of a 1/12 budget that'll need monthly approval, it's, I think just given the times, it's just not a bad idea to have a biweekly meeting on the calendar.
I completely agree.
And then do like the 8th and the second week and the 3rd and the 4th week.
Yep. Why don't we do that? So like we do the 8th and the 22nd of July.
And then you could do the 12th and 26th in August.
That's perfect. And then if we don't need them, we'll just cancel them.
Yes.
Okay.
Or augment if we wanted to do the plan.
Right. Oops, I lost my agenda. So the next item is the upcoming agendas. So I didn't have any issues with those. Is there anything people want to add?
We'll see what happens.
All right, we'll be flexible. So moving right along to item 6 on our agenda, the town administrator's update.
In the interest of time, I will be brief. I do want to mention that on our next meeting in 2 weeks, I will have a year in review of everything that's been accomplished this year, as well as just a general status update for all the projects, both the board and the community's goals, as well as, again, all the other things that the town is working on. So the only other thing that I'd mention this evening is that we've got our OPM on board, as folks know, and our community building center committee had their first meeting last week. We'll have our next week, and we're getting close to finalizing a scope of work for design services. And once we're able to do that, that's issued, and then we go out and we select a designer. And then the fun starts with a feasibility study and schematic design. So that project is, and that effort is moving along rather quickly. So those are the only two things I wanted to highlight this evening.
You know, I think one of the things we should think about is, especially given the uncertainty around town meeting, and there's been a lot of discussion about the budget. I wonder if we should maybe work with the warrant committee to set up a meeting to present the budget. I know we did a really high level overview a couple of months ago, but do you think that's a worthwhile endeavor for the next meeting?
So I'm happy to. Andy's on as well if he wants to comment. I did join the warrant committee last night to talk through both the budget in its entirety as well as some of the changes that we've made given COVID, as well as what we can expect moving forward. But, you know, happy to have more detailed conversation around, you know, all things budget next week if the board would like. Yep.
Yeah, happy to have you join. Thanks for attending last night. I think we had some questions about just the impact of COVID on the budget, and appreciate Chris taking us through that. But certainly more information is better. So if you want to attend a regular scheduled meeting, 7 o'clock Wednesday of next week.
So Robyn, the other thing as you work with Jim and Felicia, if we actually find a way to go forward with a town meeting, then really there really should be an information campaign,
right,
for the town, and it's really going to have to be depending on when the date is set. If it's later in June, better. It's almost like a weekly information session. Maybe you could do a Q&A over Zoom for people with an interest. I mean, the word's going to have to get out. All of the caveats that Jim raised earlier needs to be discussed. And if we could, you know, I think the differences between the FY20 budget and the FY21 budget in total is about under $500,000.
right.
So if we can make sort of a really tight presentation and get the information out, that really is going to be critical, including that we're looking for limited participation at the town meeting, if that's the case. So that needs to be sort of thought through and executed. I think Kate's our communications person, but I don't want to mention her name. I'm sorry, Kate.
Katie, just
All right. So that's what I was thinking about. Just making sure that we can get information out to people.
And remember, Robyn, we do have the fortnight requirement for Andy and Bob, and so
Thank you.
The flexibility of having that having the scheduled meeting with Andy a fortnight prior to our town meeting, which
right.
The probability of having the exact same number of people at that fortnight meeting
is high,
very high.
So John, there was some helicopters I saw in my hovering over my backyard earlier today.
Yes. Yeah. Acreage, Bob. Acreage. You have the
All right, gentlemen, we are very overscheduled.
Well,
so I am going to,
you've been doing all the talking.
As chair, I move that the board enter into executive session, not to return to open session for the purpose of discussing negotiations with the town administrator.
Second.
If this is a roll call vote.
Hi, Bob Springett. It's too late. I should be going to bed.
Hi, John Jeffries.
Hi, Robyn Hunter. Nina, is there something you wanted to say?
Nope, I was just saying good night all. It was nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there.